Hello, and how is everything in your inner world today? We all know there's an outer world that demands a lot of our attention and many activities, but there's also an inner world where I find people are far less active. Why is that? Hi, I'm Ann Riedelfs, retired psychiatrist, author, public speaker, listener, and gardener of the human soul. I will give you some answers to that question during this TV show today. And as a matter of fact, I started this TV show to address the inner world because I find people have so much misinformation running around in their heads in regard to the inner world. And I have a tremendous amount of experience. It's taken me decades to figure out, and a lot of hard knocks, which I'd like to share with you so your life may become easier. And I'm someone who has a healthy respect for the learning that comes with life experience. And I have with me today someone who has a tremendous amount of life experience, Peg Riedelfs, who also shares the same last name as I do. Amazing. Peg, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Right. Okay. I'm Peg Riedelfs. Was born in St. Louis, Missouri. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Washington University here. I worked as a dress designer for 3 years, then married, moved to Pennsylvania, where I raised my 3 children. When I put my last child into college, came back to St. Louis and went in the real estate business. But I'm basically just an ordinary person who's lived a very long time.
Well, ordinary people are my favorite people to talk to get my news from if they have experience with whatever the topic in question is. I find ordinary people don't have the ulterior motives and are far more likely to give the truth of their experience. So over the episodes of this new TV show, I will be interviewing a lot of people who consider themselves ordinary, but they'll have extraordinary messages to share. And having done residency in pediatrics and psychology, I'm going to be focusing on human development, and psychology being the heart, the emotions, and the mind, helping people become more comfortable with this inner world. So you've been around a few years. Peg, would you mind telling the audience how old you are?
In about 6 weeks, I'll be 91. So long time.
A few changes over the years?
Quite a few changes over the years, yeah. But back in the dark ages, I remember people were very kind. They were more, there wasn't the fear between people. I remember before I started school, I remember men would ring the back doorbell, they'd be starving. This was during the Depression. There were no jobs. There was an awful lot of poverty. But anyhow, there was no fear. My mother would bring them in. She'd fry bacon and eggs, give them toast and coffee, wish them well, and send them on their way. Perhaps in another few days or a week later, there'd be somebody else knocking on our back door. It was totally different then. It was totally different. As he said, we didn't lock our doors.
Wow.
There wasn't the fear.
And the fear becomes, there's a lot of violence in our world.
There's a lot of violence today, I think, which is really scary.
Yeah, and that's part of when we don't deal with the inner world and the violence in our own lives, it tends to manifest externally in order to get our attention. And the fear is a big part of people not looking inward because they're afraid of what they'll find, so they don't go there. Sad. Well, also, there was a lot more togetherness back then, too.
Oh, yeah. I remember when the family on the corner, I don't recall if there was severe illness, somebody died, what the circumstances, they lost their job. All the neighbors pitched in to help them. There weren't the governmental agencies, the United Way or anything like that in those days. But the neighbors all pitched in to see him through a rough period. people seem to care more for one another and wanted to help each other out.
Nice. Because developmentally, looking after one another is more mature than just being wrapped up in our own little lives. For example, you can tell all the world's problems to a baby and the baby doesn't do anything. And when we're stuck psychologically at a young age, we don't do anything in response to huge problems out there or in our family or inside ourselves. How about education? What have you seen there in terms of changes?
A lot of changes. When I started college in 1944, the tuition at Washington University was $125 a semester. These days, a year at the school is well over $50,000. Quite a difference.
Boy.
I think the financial thing is your biggest change. Tremendous.
I remember a statistic I read. It was something like 70% of Americans, when they leave a four-year college program, are in debt. And the average debt is, I think, just under $40,000.
It's a lot of money.
What a way to start out your career. Oh my goodness. And also, education lacks certain areas they're not teaching us about, like finances. I think that's important to get across to people.
Teach them how to balance a checkbook.
Yes, or invest or stay out of debt.
Stay out of debt, exactly.
So it's kind of an oxymoron there. You're getting in debt by going through an educational process. But also psychology. This is one of my pet peeves, in that I feel part of our educational system should be teaching people about their inner world, to negotiate it as easily and cleverly as we can learn to negotiate our outer world. How about medicine? Any changes there?
Well, I think the biggest, when I was a kid, you got sick, really sick. They called the doctor, the family doctor. He'd come to the house. Also, he was a family doctor. He knew us. He knew everybody that he treated. And he'd know the various psychology or what was going on in the family. If, say, Uncle Freddie or whoever drank too much, he knew about that, but he knew what was going on, and he treated the whole person because he knew us.
Nice.
Today, it's almost like an assembly line, especially if you're in the hospital.
And expensive.
And
Talk about expenses.
Right.
Yeah, I feel it's so important to know the person you're working with. And again, that's where the inner realm comes in, to know ourselves. That's how we know other people. And to know other people, we have to know ourselves. We can't just do one or the other. And also, there's very little time. Some of my colleagues have told me they have a certain time they have to keep up, and you don't have time to truly get to know another person. You can't hear the soul and hear what the soul is requiring of a person if you're on a strict schedule.
That's right.
And how about business?
Well, I think business, everything used to be small businesses. Now everything's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and greedier and greedier and greedier. I don't know. But I'm afraid, too, it doesn't seem fair that some of these CEOs make these huge fortunes, and then there are families that are just scraped by on a day-to-day basis. Something's wrong. I don't know.
And to me, this is where inner development happens, shows itself again. And that when we're stuck in infancy and just clinging to just a tiny part of who we are at a place of great loss. And that makes us greedy because we're so lacking in who we are that we try to fill it in with all these different things,
With
like
things,
money, possessions, busy activities. And we're missing out, and we're hurting a lot of people in the process.
A lot of people get hurt. Yep.
Yeah, we have to get our priorities right, and part of that priority is working on the inside, knowing that it impacts the outside in an enormous way. How about food? How has that changed?
Well, of course, people prepared their own food. This is way before processed foods. We'd have milk, of course, which would be processed. But I can remember when milk was not processed and people would get typhoid, and that again is not so good. But I used to go down to the little, I wouldn't call it a farm, one of our neighbors had quite a vegetable garden. My mother would give me a quarter. I'd walk down the street, get maybe a bunch of beets, some carrots, and a couple of potatoes, give them a quarter, and walk home. And everything was so fresh and tasted so good because it had just been picked. Nowadays, our food comes from wherever. I picked up something the other day and looked at the label. It was from Thailand. So it's kind of scary sometimes.
And all the packaging?
Oh, the other day, packaging, you need a hammer and a screwdriver to get into sometimes. Some heavy clippers.
Yeah, I'm peeling off the little labels on my organic foods, and I wonder if they use organic glue to stick it on so thoroughly. Yeah, there's some big changes in terms of
everything, food. So many foods are processed anymore. So you really don't know what you're getting. And let's face it, you can't pronounce some of the things on the ingredient labels. I figure if you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't eat it.
Yeah, I find too, when we ignore our inner world, we can, well, first of all, it requires a different nutrition than the outer world or a physical body. And to go inside and realize we haven't been feeding ourselves what we need, or our family members, that's huge. It's another reason I don't want to go there. I don't want to have to face all that. And when we become increasingly artificial ourselves, our world becomes artificial, our food becomes artificial, reflecting what choices we've made. Yeah. And because we're doing this collectively as a people, it's manifesting more and more in our country. Yeah. Well, there have been some positive changes over the years, huh?
Right. When I was in school, this would have been during the 30s and 40s. At that time here in St. Louis, African Americans had to sit in the back of the bus. Also, I went to public schools, and again, the African American kids had their own separate school. They weren't in our school, which is kind of sad. So I was really delighted to see that Americans could elect themselves an African American president.
How about technology?
That's I hope maybe one of these days we'll be progressive enough to elect a woman president too. So.
Other countries have had women leaders.
Oh yeah, many.
And how about technology? What have you seen in that regard?
Technology, there's a lot of it. In fact, I think there's almost too much out there now. However, my daughter gave me an iPad for Christmas, and I'm afraid I am hooked. I have to sort of restrict how many hours I put in on it. But it's so wonderful to be able to email somebody in Europe, and then they email you back. I just sent some greetings to a friend in the UK. That, I think, is extraordinary. However, there's so much out there that sometimes you don't know what to believe, and you really should kind of vet your sources of information that you're getting the best possible. Frankly, I'm a big fan of PBS. I think they're very fair. Yeah,
technology, there's
so
the good,
much.
bad, and the ugly, but there is a lot of useful information if you know how to find it. And I guess one of the things that I really am appreciative of as time goes by is psychology is more and more in people's conversations, in the news, like the current trauma being exposed by priests hurting children. And most people have had some trauma, and yet in the past, we weren't allowed to talk about it. And so I'm so appreciative that more and more people are being encouraged to speak.
I think, frankly, it's healthy to talk about things.
Absolutely.
When I was a kid, I knew nothing. Nobody talked about anything. Everything was hush-hush.
Yeah, brings Katrina to mind, that after the Katrina disaster, people had to talk. Everywhere you went to a restaurant, the waitresses would be talking about what happened, and rightly so. It's just natural to want to talk about trauma and get help to work it through, get support.
Yeah, I remember during Katrina when the grocery stores weren't open. Really, there was nothing open. However, the churches had wonderful soup kitchens. The one nearest me was set up in a abandoned garage, but you saw everybody there from all walks of life. They had big barrels of fresh water, bottles of fresh water, and they usually had things like maybe a barbecue and some greens and bread and cookies for dessert. But it was lovely, and we were all in the same boat. It was a very diverse group, all nationalities, all religions, all everything.
Socioeconomic groups,
friendly. It was wonderful.
Everybody was on the same plane. We were all
everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I love that community spirit.
It was wonderful. Yeah, I wouldn't want to repeat it, but it had its wonderful aspects. It had and very enlightening aspects to it.
Yeah, and I often wonder, knowing what that disaster did to the people of New Orleans to bring them together, if we're staging another one in this country to bring us together. We're getting so divisive. Or do we need a disaster to bring us together? I hope not.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
But I'm remembering one day I was walking out with 2 telephones. I only needed one. So a neighbor needed a telephone. This was after the Katrina disaster, and I gave it to her. And just then, another person showed up. She had lunch and shared it with everyone. And again, that communal feeling, the communal experience,
helping one another,
is beautiful. And it taught me giving in abundance to those who are in need. Something that stayed with me over the years. I'll never forget that. And that's become a premise for my life, of how I live my life. Anything else about the environment?
Oh, I guess that's my biggest bugaboo. It's scary, I think, what's happening right now. Well, you look at Flint, Michigan, where their water supply was contaminated and nobody did anything for months. But currently, I believe they have recently rolled back restrictions on disposal of toxic waste, which had been instituted by our former administration. It's scary. We've got to keep our water clean. We need it for survival. We need to keep our air fresh. One of the things that bugs me too about the environment is currently, I believe they're going to allow gas and oil exploration in our national parks as well as wildlife sanctuaries. Let's face it, you destroy these scenic sites, you're not going to be able to put them back together again. Remember, you can't fool Mother Nature.
And I'm thinking of extinction of species. Since you were growing up, so many species have become extinct. And I'm talking mammals as well.
I think of the bees. The bee population is way down. And that is detrimental because it affects our agriculture.
Yeah. And it's scary because we are mammals. So with all the people getting increasingly ill, remember 60 to 70% of Americans now, adult Americans, have at least one chronic illness. So I think the environment contributes to the poor health.
Right, it does.
And that environment, again, is reflecting our inner environment, which if we're not looking at it and working on it, we really don't know what's going on there. And also the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. I read a statistic recently. It was over 8,000 square miles of dead zone where nothing can live in the Gulf of Mexico. Something that used to have just teeming with life. And now so much of it is dead. It's really concerning. It's the size of New Jersey.
That's the delta area of the Mississippi, right?
The outlet of the Mississippi.
All the fertilizing stuff that comes down. Yeah, that reminds me, the Mississippi used to be clean. My great aunt had a place in Illinois on the Mississippi, and at that time it was a beautiful beach, and we used to go down there and play in the sand and whatever. Not anymore.
Well, thinking of all the toxicity in our environment and how it applies to our inner world, there's so much guilt and shame in each of us for living our own lives instead of living in community and helping people and meeting everyone's needs, not just physical, but emotional, mental, spiritual. That's one of the big reasons I think people avoid their inner world, is there's so much pain there and they just don't want to go there. We've all been victimizers at times. We've all been victims at times. And people would rather just turn on their computer and escape. Well, anything else you'd like to say to our audience today, Peg?
I don't think so. But thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And as she spilled the beans, this is my dear mother who's given me life in so many ways. And I just want to encourage you all to think about that enlivening, how you can enliven everyone in your life. Because what is going on in our inner world greatly impacts our outer world, so much so. And I'll be going into this in further episodes of my show. But for now, know that whatever you're not addressing in here will manifest sooner or later in the outside world. And if you're not happy about some of the changes we've talked about today, don't be like an infant and do nothing. Please sense into that inner fountain of wisdom that we all have and find out what your role is. What are your next steps for making some changes? And to be most effective, whatever changes you make out here, make some changes in here as well. And if you need any help, I hope you'll contact me at annthelistener@yahoo.com. And Peg, thanks so much, Mom, for being on my first show with me. All for now.
Bye.